The midday sun burned over the dusty fields of Bell County, Texas. Heat shimmered in waves above the old McCallum auction grounds, where a crowd of weathered men stood shoulder to shoulder, their hats casting long shadows over sunburned faces. The smell of horse sweat and dry hay lingered in the air, and boots crunched against the dirt as voices murmured about the day's lineup. But when Rosie, a gray mule with mournful eyes, was led into the ring, something shifted. Boaz Merriweather, a man once known throughout the county but unseen in nearly 5 years, stood just beyond the fence, leaning on his cane. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow like someone who'd buried too much and spoken too little. He hadn't been seen since the night his daughter, Loretta Blythe, vanished without a trace. Some said he left town out of shame. Others believed the guilt consumed him. But now he was back, and nobody knew why. In the ring, Eben Stokes, a ranch hand with quiet hands and a mean back, tugged Rosie forward. She refused to move. Her hooves locked into the dirt, her neck stiff, her body trembling with a tension no one could quite place. She didn't rear up or bray, she just stood there, frozen, eyes fixed on something no one else could see. A hush fell over the crowd. "Come on now, girl," Eben muttered under his breath, giving the rope another tug. Rosie let out a low, guttural sound, half breath, half cry. It wasn't defiance. It was pain. Deep, old pain. Her head tilted ever so slightly toward the far gate. Cyrus Delmore, the auction foreman, stepped out from the shadows of the barn. His thick hands rested on his belt buckle, eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his dusty hat. "Ain't never seen her like this," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "She's seen something." Then, from the back, Boaz took a step forward. Just one. That was all it took. Rosie snapped her head toward him. Her ears shot up, her body quivered. She let out a sharp, high-pitched bray that silenced the arena. The crowd turned, startled, as Rosie began to move, but not toward the auction gate. Toward Boaz. She pressed her head into his chest and let out a low, grieving sigh. And just like that, it was clear. She hadn't frozen from fear. She had been waiting. For him. The murmurs started as soon as Rosie nuzzled against Boaz's chest. Men exchanged uneasy glances, their brows furrowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. The auction had come to a standstill, and Cyrus Delmore wasn't pleased. "We got 20 more heads to get through," he grunted, motioning for someone to clear the ring. But no one moved. Not even Deputy Amos Blackridge, who leaned against a post with his arms crossed, chewing on a toothpick, his eyes locked on Boaz. Boaz barely acknowledged the stares. His hand rested on Rosie's neck, and for the first time in years he felt something stir inside him, something close to recognition or maybe guilt. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The mule's reaction said more than words ever could. Rosie hadn't seen him since Loretta vanished. But here she was, 5 years later, remembering something, someone. "What the hell's goin' on?" whispered Silas Creedmoor, standing behind the fence. He'd worked the back stalls the night Loretta went missing. Claimed he didn't see anything then. Claimed a lot of things. Now his eyes were fixed on Boaz like a man seeing a ghost. "That mule. She knows something." In the crowd, Darla June Haskett pushed her way closer, shielding her eyes from the sun. She was in her late 60s now, once the town's most respected schoolteacher, and someone who'd always had a soft spot for Boaz and Loretta. She watched Rosie press against Boaz's body, not with fear, but longing. She felt her chest tighten. "They're connected," she whispered to herself. And that connection didn't start today. Years ago, Rosie had belonged to Loretta. Darla remembered the girl riding through the town on the young mule's back, barefoot and wild, her red hair loose in the wind. Loretta had trained Rosie herself, whispered secrets to her in the stable. If anyone knew what really happened that night, Darla thought, maybe it's not a person at all, maybe it's the mule. Back near the barn, Pastor Jasper Bellamy watched in silence. His faith had been shaken after Loretta's disappearance. He'd buried too many good people since then. Now he watched Boaz, shoulders slumped, hands shaking slightly, as if he were a man carrying the weight of something he never confessed. Jasper clenched his jaw. "God doesn't give signs without a reason," he muttered. "And this mule just gave us one loud and clear." The next morning, the ranch was quieter than usual. A thin fog clung to the pastures, blurring the fence lines and dulling the colors of the rising sun. Boaz stood by the barn with Rosie beside him, still tethered but calm. The way she followed his every step hadn't gone unnoticed. She didn't bray, didn't resist. She just stayed near him, like a dog guarding its final memory. People had seen it, and they were talking. Inside the feedhouse, Deputy Amos Blackridge sipped burnt coffee from a tin mug while staring out the window toward Boaz. "You believe in signs, Pastor?" he muttered without looking at the man beside him. Pastor Bellamy, seated on a broken crate, didn't answer immediately. His gaze was fixed on Rosie. "I believe in guilt," he finally said. "And that mule's carrying a memory no one else dares speak." Boaz hadn't spoken to anyone since the incident in the auction ring. He slept in the tack room behind the barn, alone. But that morning, just before sunrise, Magnolia Nolly Reddick, the old stable-keeper, found him staring at a patch of dirt near the south fence. Rosie was pawing at the ground like she wanted to dig. "She keeps going back to that same spot," Boaz had said, voice thin. "Same spot Loretta used to sit." Word spread fast. By noon, Silas Creedmoor, Cyrus Delmore, and a few of the younger hands had gathered by the south fence, pretending to be busy while keeping one eye on Boaz. Silas leaned over to Cyrus and muttered, "He's tryin' to stir the past." "You think that's wise?" Cyrus grunted. "Depends on what the past's got buried under that dirt." Meanwhile, Darla June Haskett returned to her attic, where she kept a shoebox of letters and trinkets from her students. Among them were 3 folded notes written by Loretta herself, quiet, desperate words scratched onto old paper, mentioning voices outside her window, and a man she didn't name. Darla read them again with trembling hands. "Why didn't I show these before?" she whispered. "Why didn't I believe her?" By sundown, Boaz walked Rosie out once more. Without command, she led him straight back to that same patch of dirt. Her breathing grew shallow, her hooves restless. She stood over the spot and didn't move. Boaz knelt down beside her, eyes fixed on the ground. Something was there. And Rosie remembered. The next morning came heavy, as if the sky itself knew what was about to rise from the ground. Fog rolled off the lowlands, and the south fence was lined with silence. Boaz stood there again, shovel in hand, Rosie beside him, her head low but her ears alert. She hadn't moved from that same patch of dirt. No one asked questions anymore. They only watched. Some from behind barn doors, others from the porch of the auction house, coffee in hand and hearts in their throats. Boaz didn't dig like a man looking for closure. He dug like a man who already knew what he'd find. With each shovelful of dry earth, more of the air seemed to thicken. By the time Eben Stokes and Deputy Blackridge stepped closer, a small box-shaped piece of metal had begun to show through the soil. It was old, rusted, almost lost to time. "It's hers," Boaz said quietly, brushing away the dirt with shaking hands. "Loretta's keepsake box. She buried it here when she was 15. Said she didn't want anyone to find it. Not even me." His voice cracked. For a moment he didn't speak. Rosie stood so still beside him that she looked carved from stone. Only her eyes moved, and they didn't leave that box. Inside, wrapped in a faded bandana, were several small items: a silver locket, a photograph of Boaz and Loretta at the county fair, and a letter, sealed with wax but now brittle with age. Boaz handed it to Pastor Bellamy, who had quietly joined the circle forming around them. "You read it," Boaz said, stepping back like the letter might bite. The pastor opened it with care. The words inside were hurried, some almost illegible, but the message was unmistakable. Loretta had written about feeling watched. Followed. She mentioned voices at night, footsteps, and finally a name. Clintus Dre. The name made everyone freeze. Cyrus Delmore took off his hat. That can't be right. Clintus left town the same year she vanished. His voice trailed off. Everyone remembered Clint, rough, short-tempered, and close to Boaz once. Too close. No one had seen him in 5 years. No one had wanted to. Boaz looked around, his expression blank. "I thought it was me she was running from," he said. "But maybe she was trying to run to me. I just wasn't there." And Rosie, as if sensing the weight of those words, let out a soft, hollow cry that echoed across the field like a memory finally breaking loose. By mid-afternoon, word had spread beyond the ranch. The name Clintus Dre wasn't just written in ink anymore. It was being spoken again, like a ghost let loose. Every corner of Bell County felt it. Old men at the feed store paused their card games. Women at the diner whispered over biscuits. Clint had been trouble, even back then. A man who drank too much and kept to the shadows. And now, after all these years, his name had clawed its way back to the surface. Deputy Blackridge rode out to the county records trailer, dust rising beneath his wheels. He remembered Clintus well. Too well. Had a habit of gettin' close to what didn't belong to him, the deputy muttered to himself. No one had ever proven anything, but back in '98 there were whispers about another girl. Different town, same fear in her eyes. But Clint disappeared before questions could catch up. Back at the ranch, Boaz sat alone on a bale of hay, the letter still echoing in his mind. Guilt settled into his chest like a storm cloud. He had hated himself for years, thinking Loretta had run away because of him. His silence, his distance, his grief after her mother died. But now he realized she may have been trying to warn him. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid for him. Magnolia, Nolly. Reddick stepped quietly into the barn and set down a small, cloth-bound book on the bench beside Boaz. "Loretta kept a journal," she said gently. "She gave it to me a few days before she vanished. Told me not to open it unless something felt wrong." Her voice cracked. "I think it's time, Boaz." He opened the first few pages with shaking hands. Scribbled thoughts. Drawings of Rosie. Notes about voices in the night. Mentions of Clintus. A line stood out, "If anything happens, Rosie will remember." She always remembers. Boaz read it again. Then again. "She left everything with the mule," he whispered. Outside, Rosie stood beneath the old pecan tree where Loretta used to sing as a child. Her head lifted slightly, ears twitching at the wind. She took a few slow steps, not randomly, but deliberately, toward the far paddock gate that hadn't been opened in years. Boaz watched her and rose to his feet, journal still in hand. He knew now, Rosie wasn't just remembering. She was leading him somewhere. The old paddock gate hadn't creaked in years. Rust clung to its hinges like barnacles on a forgotten ship, and the weeds had grown up around it, tall and wild like nature was trying to erase what lay beyond. But Rosie stood before it now, motionless, ears tilted forward, eyes fixed. The same patch of land where Loretta had often wandered, drawn to a quiet that only she and the mule seemed to understand. Boaz approached slowly, journal still tucked under his arm. He glanced at Magnolia Reddick, who stood a few paces behind him, clutching her shawl. "That gate wasn't used since before Loretta was born," she whispered. "Your wife always said it gave her the creeps." Boaz nodded, not because he remembered, but because something deep inside him had started to ache. as if his bones knew what lay ahead before his mind caught up. With effort, he pried the latch free. The gate groaned as it opened, revealing a narrow path, barely visible beneath the overgrowth. Rosie stepped in without hesitation, as if her hooves had traveled that trail 1,000 times in her dreams. Boaz followed, his breath shallow, his chest tight. The wind moved through the grass in whispers, like voices speaking through time. They reached a clearing, small, silent, forgotten. There, half buried beneath wildflowers and moss, stood a decaying wooden shed. Its roof sagged inward, and the door hung from one hinge. Boaz felt his stomach knot. He turned to Rosie. She had stopped moving. She was staring at the door, breathing hard. Back at the main barn, Deputy Blackridge had returned with files in hand, and a face pale as the clouds rolling in. "I found him," he said to Pastor Bellamy. "Clintus Dray. He's been livin' just outside county lines. Changed his name. Bought land under a fake LLC. He never left. He's been here the whole time." The words hit like thunder. Pastor Bellamy looked toward the horizon. Then Boaz isn't just chasing ghosts anymore. Back in the clearing, Boaz reached the shed. He placed a hand on the door, pausing. The silence around him felt unnatural, like the air itself was holding its breath. He pushed it open slowly. The hinges screamed. Darkness greeted him. Rosie didn't follow. She stayed outside, watching, waiting, because what Boaz was about to find was never meant to be found again. The air inside the shed was stale, heavy, unmoving, as if it hadn't been disturbed in years. Dust floated in narrow beams of sunlight piercing through the cracks in the wood. Boaz stepped cautiously, boots creaking on warped floorboards. The smell hit him first, damp wood, rusted metal, and something sourer, older. It wasn't death, but it was close. The kind of scent that clung to things left behind on purpose. He swept his flashlight across the room. Cobwebs hung like curtains, sagging with age. A rusted cot sat in the corner, its mattress split open, stuffing spilling like a wounded animal. Tools lined the walls, not the kind used for farming, but for fixing, binding, cutting. His chest tightened. Then he saw it, a faded flannel shirt crumpled in the corner, just small enough to have belonged to a teenage girl. His breath caught. It was Loretta's. He remembered the pattern. Boaz dropped to his knees. His hands hovered over the shirt, trembling. There were claw marks on the wall behind it, faint but deliberate. Scratches in wood that told a story no voice ever had. "She was here," he whispered. "She fought." A deep ache spread in his chest, not just from grief, but shame. For not seeing. For not listening. For not being the father she needed when it mattered most. Outside, Rosie stood still as a statue. Her ears twitched, but she didn't move. Magnolia Reddick had followed to the edge of the trail and now stood beside her, silently watching the shed. "She knows," Magnolia whispered. "She's always known." Tears welled in her eyes. Rosie gave a low, slow bray, not loud, not frantic, but mournful, like a prayer too late. Back at the ranch house, Deputy Blackridge slammed a folder onto the kitchen table where Pastor Bellamy and Darla June Saturday, Clintus Dray never left. Changed his name to Richard Carr. He bought land less than 10 miles from here, near Mill Creek. Bellamy paled. That's Loretta's old riding route, the one she never returned from. Darla June pressed her hands together. Then that man's been hiding in plain sight and watching. Back in the shed, Boaz stood, eyes fixed on the scratches in the wall. Something else caught his eye, a metal trapdoor beneath the cot, nearly hidden by debris. The latch was old, rusted shut, but not broken. He hesitated. His fingers reached for it slowly, almost against his will. Because deep down, Boaz knew. The worst hadn't been found yet. The trapdoor resisted, rusted shut by years of rain and rot, but Boaz pressed on. His knuckles bled as he pried at the corroded latch with an old crowbar he'd found by the wall. Sweat dripped down his temple. The silence around him was crushing. No birdsong, no wind, only the dull sound of metal straining against wood. When the latch finally snapped, the echo rang like a gunshot. Dust rose as he pulled the trap open, revealing a narrow set of stairs descending into darkness. The air that rushed out was colder, denser. It smelled of mold, damp earth, and something sour. Boaz hesitated only a moment. Then he gripped the flashlight tighter and descended slowly, each step groaning beneath his weight. His heart pounded. He wasn't sure if he was ready. But it no longer mattered. He had to know. At the bottom, the flashlight beam swept across concrete walls and a dirt floor. It wasn't a cellar, it was a bunker. A makeshift space, hidden deliberately. Along one wall, chains hung from rusted bolts, now slack. In the far corner, a stack of old notebooks sat beneath a moth-eaten blanket. Boaz approached slowly, his mouth dry. He knelt and picked one up. The first page was scribbled with Loretta's handwriting. "If anyone finds this, I tried. I really did." Boaz dropped the notebook like it had burned him. His knees buckled. He sat in the dirt, shaking, sobs rising from somewhere deep in his chest. She had been here, trapped, writing, hoping someone would come. And no one ever did. Not him. Not the law. No one. The weight of that truth crushed him from the inside. Outside, Rosie took a step forward, nudging the open shed door with her muzzle. She let out a trembling breath. Behind her, Magnolia whispered a prayer, holding tightly to the fence post for balance. The sky had darkened, clouds rolling in, as if the land itself grieved what had been uncovered. Meanwhile, back at the station, Deputy Blackridge gathered a search team. Clintus Dray, now Richard Carr, had been located, a trailer tucked deep into the woods beyond Mill Creek. "Don't wait for a warrant," he told his men. "If what Boaz found is real, then this stops tonight." Boaz climbed out of the bunker, filthy and hollow-eyed. He looked at Rosie, who stared back without blinking. The mule hadn't moved from her spot. She'd brought him here for this. Because Rosie never forgot. And now, neither would he. The road to Mill Creek twisted through pine and oak, narrowing into gravel as the sun dipped low behind the hills. Deputy Blackridge led the convoy, sirens off, headlights dimmed. He wanted no warnings. Behind him, 3 marked cruisers rolled silent through the trees, dust rising behind them like ghosts. They were going in heavy, unsure of what they'd find, but certain that it wouldn't be clean. The trailer came into view just past a rusted gate half swallowed by brush. It sat crooked on cinder blocks, windows dark, a single antenna rising like a crooked finger into the gray sky. "This is it," Blackridge muttered, stepping out, hand on his sidearm. He approached slowly, boots crunching gravel, heart steady, but ready. Behind him, Pastor Bellamy and Boaz waited in a separate truck, Rosie tethered just behind. She had insisted on following, stubborn as ever. Inside the trailer, Clintus Dray, now calling himself Richard Carr, sat in a stained recliner, one eye on the crackling TV and the other on the bottle in his hand. He didn't flinch when the door burst open. "I knew it'd come," he muttered as Blackridge entered, weapon drawn. "You dig deep enough in this county, sooner or later you hit me." He smiled, teeth yellow and crooked. "You found the girl's bunker, didn't you?" Boaz pushed past the deputy before anyone could stop him. He stood in front of Clintus, hands clenched, eyes wild. "She trusted you," he growled. "She told me you were like an uncle to her." Clintus scoffed. "She was lonely. Lonely girls don't know what they want." The words sliced through the air like blades. Blackridge lunged forward, restraining Boaz before he struck. Behind them, Rosie neighed sharply, breaking the tension like a thunderclap. She had pulled free from her tether and now stood just outside the trailer, her hooves rooted like stone. Clintus's eyes flicked toward her, and for the first time his smirk faded. "That damn mule," he muttered. "She watched everything." His voice trembled. Deputies moved in. Cuffs snapped. Clintus was dragged out under the darkening sky, past Rosie, who didn't move an inch. Her eyes locked with his as he passed. He looked away. As the trailer faded behind them and the lights of the convoy lit the road home, Boaz sat beside Rosie in the back of the truck bed. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. But something in him, something hollow, had finally closed. A week later, the wind carried the scent of wildflowers across the southern pasture. The shed was gone, torn down, cleared away, burned to ash. The soil had been turned, blessed, and replanted with pecan saplings. But one tree still stood at the edge of the fence line, older than the rest. Beneath it, a simple wooden marker bore her name, Loretta Blythe Merriweather. No dates, just the carving of a bird in flight, etched by Boaz's own hand. The townsfolk came quietly, offering food, silence, and heavy hearts. Pastor Bellamy led the service beneath the tree, his voice steady but low. "What we lost, we can't replace," he said. "But what we remember, we carry forward." Rosie stood beside Boaz, still and reverent, her muzzle brushing against the wooden cross every so often. She hadn't left that field since the day they returned from Mill Creek. After the crowd faded and the sun dropped low, Darla June approached Boaz and handed him a small envelope. "She wrote this the week before she disappeared," Darla said, tears in her voice. "I was too afraid to give it to you back then." "I'm not proud of that." Boaz nodded, accepting the letter with a steady hand. "None of us were ready," he whispered. "Not then." He opened the letter by the tree. Loretta's handwriting was light, rushed, but hopeful. "If you ever read this, Daddy, it means I found the courage to speak up. I hope you do too. Don't carry this alone. Rosie will remember for me, but you have to live for me. Plant flowers where there was silence, and sing where I used to." Boaz folded the letter slowly, then looked toward Rosie. "She wanted us to sing," he said, voice cracking. "I don't think I even remember how." Rosie snorted softly, nudging his side. He chuckled, for the first time in what felt like a decade. "Maybe I'll learn again." That evening, as the stars began to appear, Boaz sat beneath the tree, journal in hand, and began to write. Not about death, not about guilt, but about Loretta, how she laughed, how she loved that mule, and how she used to sing in this very field. And as Rosie laid down beside him, eyes half closed, ears twitching at the wind, Boaz began to hum. Just a note, then another, a broken, human melody, in the field where she once sang.